Okay. Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome to our first ever episode of our Many Moons podcast on the very auspicious day of Advaita Acharya's appearance day. And this podcast kind of started off just literally off the back of a conversation with me and my dear friend Sharadia. We were looking at ways in which we could better serve other Vaishnavis, and then we thought, what better way to serve each other than actually bringing them the association of other senior devotees. So we're very grateful for our very first guest speaker, Visakha Devi Dasi, who's with us today, and looking forward to having this first episode with you all. So thank you very much for joining us today. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sharadia to introduce herself and to take us through this podcast.
Thank you for the introduction, Dee. And I just also want to welcome all our viewers on YouTube, all our viewers on Facebook. We're very grateful for your support. I'm Sharadia Rasa Devi Dasi. And as Dee shared, I think we both share a passion to try and find ways to support the Vaishnavis. And we thought that one way we could do that was to create a platform where we could discuss topics and issues which are often not discussed in normal lectures and seminars, but are often very relevant and pressing issues. And we felt that it would be wonderful if we can get especially senior Vaishnavis to have discussions about these topics. So today we are speaking on the topic of how Vaishnavis can serve in leadership. And our guest with us tonight is someone that I think many of you would know, and it is Visakha Devi Dasi. So Visakha, we know that you are very well known for your many years of service as a photographer, also as a cinematographer, and numerous films. I think your latest one was the Hare Krishna, the Mantra, and the Movement, and the Swami who started all. And you're also known for books. I know you've written several books. The one, Harmony and the Bhagavad Gita. The other one, I think the more recent one, is 5 years and 11 months and an unexpected lifetime of devotion. However, currently, although you weren't even based near Bhaktivedanta Manor in the UK, you serve there as the temple president. So we are curious, how did you get invited to be the temple president? And can you maybe share your journey into being the first Vaishnavi temple president at the Manor?
Thank you to be with you. I'm very honored to be in your company. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvasesa Sunyavadi Paskyata Shatarane. So, as you mentioned, my husband spearheaded this in the film memoir, 5 to 11 months. Can you hear me? Hare Krishna. I'm sorry, I have an unstable internet connection. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So around the same time I've completed this memoir, 5 years, 11 months, we also finished the film. And at that time I had a thought that just went through my head. It was a very clear thought, but also vague. And it was that I had been doing the same services, writing and photography and helping my husband with film work for about 40 plus years. And I'd really like to do something different. But I didn't say that to anyone, and I didn't really think it again. But at the time, it was a very clear thought, but no idea what to do, just something different. And about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from one of the trustees of Bhaktivedanta Manor saying that the former temple president, unfortunately, was ill and couldn't resume his service, and would I be interested in taking that service as temple president. So I was shocked. It never crossed my mind to to do such a thing. But then I remembered this thought that I had, and I thought I should try. So I tried.
Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much
sharing
for
that
sharing
story,
that
Prabhu.
story, Prabhu.
What I appreciated about it is how it seems that you had this desire, and although you didn't even express it, it seems that Krishna did reciprocate with you, but through the devotees who then invited you to serve there as temple president.
Just a quick one from me, Prabhu. When you took up the invitation and accepted it, were you at any point hesitant? It's not a country where you lived with, conscious that you knew the community before because they obviously were familiar with you. Did you have any reservations or any thoughts about accepting it, or did you think you're just gonna take up the challenge?
Have much experience with this kind of service. And of course, I'm not from the country, although my mother was born and raised in England. I I was not from England, of course, and I didn't know too many devotees here. I knew some. So yeah, I had a lot of hesitation.
And we're, of course, very glad although you hesitated, you accepted the invitation, and we are absolutely grateful and delighted you did. And actually, another question which is related to it, there's in some parts of the devotee community, there's an idea that women should actually not be in leadership positions because to be a leader is an inherently masculine thing. And if you become a leader as a woman, then you cannot somehow fulfill your dharma as a woman. So, what practical experiences have you had with it? And have you seen other Vaishnavis go through this, this kind of idea that women shouldn't be in leadership roles because it's a very masculine thing to do so?
Feeling because it is the exception to have women leaders in all fields, not just the devotional realm, but the non-devotional realm also. But one of the very prominent devotees here mentioned to me at the manor that we have many, many managers here. We have many organizers, we have many doers and strategists, but we don't have perhaps enough heart. So perhaps where that's something the women can contribute, the heart. In other words, taking each and every devotee as important because each and every devotee is important, and trying to carve out time to encourage the devotees and to get them to know them in a personal way and to understand their trials and their aspirations and get involved in a personal way that affects the devotees and encourages them. So perhaps that's an important role that women have a very important part to play in.
Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much for
sharing that
sharing that.
beautiful answer, Visakha Prabhu. And I think one thing that really struck me is we sometimes forget that there's also, there's different aspects of leadership, especially in a society as ISKCON. On the one hand, there's leadership which has more to do with the managerial side and getting things done, as you said, strategizing, planning, those types of things. But another very essential aspect of leadership is what we call pastoral care, like looking after the community, nourishing the community, staying connected, with the community, and then also, giving different forms of spiritual guidance. And as you highlighted now, it seems that, there's like there's certain feminine qualities as women's ability to stay more connected with more people in general, which actually make them very well suited in that, in those types of roles. Someone that's really a caretaker of the community, because I think, as you rightly put it, if we have leadership with a good head which does all the planning, the strategizing, the visionaries, but it's not supported by a soft heart, I think we are definitely going to lack in something in our community.
Yeah, and I could add that Prabhupada also gave the example of encouraging devotees personally, being aware of what they were doing and going out of his way to express his gratitude for what they're doing. For instance, when we were at the Fifth Avenue temple, Prabhupada went to the parking lot where Jayananda Prabhu and his team were constructing the Rath cart for the Rath Yatra that went down Fifth Avenue. So he was very aware of what devotees were doing generally. If a woman gave a beautiful vase and put it in his room, he would remark on that. So he set the example in that way.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Visakha
Visakha
Prabhu.
Prabhu.
And let me unmute. Essentially, another question related to it. I know there's this positive element that we discussed where we think, women are actually very good contributors in terms of providing that pastoral care, sort of that emotional leadership we often lack in places. But equally, we have this stereotype that sometimes people think that, if you're a leader as a woman, you cannot somehow become a good mother or a good wife. So, can women actually be both exemplary leaders and mothers and wives?
Believer that when the women have small children, that takes a lot of time and energy, and that should really be devoted to the child. Those are the formative years. And we certainly don't want our children to feel neglected, to feel they're in second place. That as much as possible, both parents, but especially the mother, should be there for the child. But as the child grows and goes to school, then the woman has more time. So if she has this propensity to get involved in that way, and she's good at that and has the support of the community, then by all means, we need that. We can't frustrate her and also injure ourselves by not accepting her gift, the gift that Krishna has given her. So we want that to be used for Krishna's service. To prevent that or to discourage that, and no one wins. She becomes frustrated, and then we as a community don't benefit from the gift that she has.
Thank you. That was very, very helpful, actually, in terms of your description. Because you're right. Because this is misconception, but equally, if a woman's vana is to do that leadership role, I suppose, and if it's done in a way like you said, that's supported and nurtured by the family and the community, I don't think that should be. That should be prevented at all. So, yeah, thank you so much for that lovely answer.
Just a thought that I also was that you emphasized that when children are small, there's a need that a wife or a mother, it really makes the children the priority. And I think that's definitely important. I work in education, and there's a lot of research that indicates, the first formative years of a child, it's essential that that child really feels safe and really feels that they are a priority for the parents. And that gives them a much stronger sense of self-confidence and self-esteem, and that helps a child right throughout their entire life. But I think with that also, you touched upon the idea that we all go through different phases of life, and if you have a child, I think by the time the child is 18, 20, definitely the child might be going on to university. And at that stage, I think it's then maybe possible for a lady, a Vaishnavi, to move out of the role of just being a mother, for that specific child, but then being a mother, in a greater sense for the whole community. And I think if you think about the relationship of a mother towards a child, the mother is also a leader for the child. She's also an educator for the child. So I can see that especially, senior Vaishnavis could play a nourishing mother and leadership role at the same time within the community. And I can see how that could potentially, address many shortcomings, that we have, for instance, in the field of devotee care. We know that in recent years there's been a great emphasis on devotee care, but I think at the same time we'd agree that there still can be a lot more that we can do to improve devotee care. And I can see mothers, using that propensity to love and to nurture, but to spread that out to the community. I can see that as a great service, but especially if they also have a position of leadership which gives them access to the resources and also some decision-making power, so they can optimally fulfill that role.
Yeah, very beautifully stated. I appreciate your vision in that way. But I would only add that it's really not just being a mother. To be a mother is a very great service, perhaps an overlooked and underrated service, but an extraordinary service to do for Krishna and for Prabhupada. Very selfless service and non-stop. It's a lifelong service as well.
So devotees, we just want to apologize. We are having some technical difficulties with the sound, so we are aware that sometimes you do hear an echo. We're doing our best to to work around this technical issue, but yeah, please just bear with us. So at the moment, only one of us can have our mic on at the time, so we are aware that there's a little bit of a pause in between the time in which we are responding to each other. But yeah, we're making the best of this bit of a challenging technical situation. So we wanted to move on to another question, and I find this very interesting. I was looking at different research that has been done about women in leadership, and one thing that I found fascinating is that it was found that the fact that there is more men in leadership, we call it the prevalence of males in senior leadership. Well, the research indicates that it doesn't actually have anything to do with inherent qualities that the men have. It is more to do just with the way society, has positioned men and women. And in fact, it is shown that, when it comes to women in leadership, they have just as many good attributes as the men in leadership. In some instances, they have, attributes which the men don't have. So what they found is that there are certain feminine qualities as empathy, which they felt actually enhances leadership. Also, they found that if women are in leadership, they tend to be, I found this quite interesting, more democratic in their decision making. They would consult more people before making decisions. And we know that when Prabhupada was physically present, he would often encourage devotees as couples to serve together. And although the man would be the temple president, if we hear the stories from devotees, we often hear how the husband and the wife would actually be managing the temple together. So we are curious why you think, or why Prabhupada did this. Why did Prabhupada, encourage couples versus, single, say, brahmacharis or sannyasis to manage temples? And why did Prabhupada also even, in certain instances, said that women could act as temple presidents?
Yeah, thank you. It's an important question. I think we also have to look at the psychology of men and women, in that men tend to feel superior to women, and women tend to defer to men. That's the psychological tendency, you could say. And so, based on that, very often it's difficult for a man to be working under a woman. It's, for many men, that's rather challenging. So, women have to understand that and deal with it appropriately, not try to correct it, because that it's not something, a tendency can't really be corrected. It's just there to be dealt with. So if you have this husband-wife combination, that becomes a very natural, harmonious way that the man can take the charge. He can be the one that drives forward on different visions. And meanwhile, the woman is there to be personal, to be caring with the individuals, as we say, to be nurturing. And so you have this balance, the empathy side and the ambitions and fulfilling the vision and driving towards the goal side, working together, it becomes very harmonious and complete. Whereas one without the other can be lacking. So the idea of husband and wife leading a temple together, I think it has worked in the past. One example is Gurudas and Jamuna at Soho Street, or Bury Place rather. They were running the temple together very successfully. So it's a model that we can look to, for sure.
Thank you, Visakha Guru. That was very interesting because I think we also often forget, people go very on both extremes, isn't it? Men should be just the ones leading, or the others kind of say, oh, it should just be women. I think there is this lack of, cooperation. There's so much more we can do if Prabhus and, Mataji's, join forces, because we can then use that femininity and masculinity to kind of balance each other out. And like we mentioned earlier, a man would naturally, I don't know, maybe, generalizations, less prone to kind of democratically, research has proved, take decisions, whereas, they normally like to spearhead things, whereas women want to sort of almost take everybody with them. So I think if you have that balance, I think that male, female, different dharmas could kind of work very well together in terms of serving and in terms of leadership roles, I think.
Recently stepped down from being chancellor in Germany. She was there for 16 years. And it was remarked that she would strive to have consensus behind the scenes. Not that she would power her way through, but rather she would approach the individual ministers or department heads that she was dealing with, and through one-on-one interpersonal relationships, strive for consensus. And that proved very successful.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Another thing we've spoken a little bit about how we kind of encourage ladies that are qualified to take on leadership roles. But for a woman to be a leader, there needs to be some degree of aspiration and ambition, particularly to take on a leadership position. And I was absolutely fascinated when I read your book, Harmony and the Living in Harmony and the Bhagavad Gita. And it was a beautifully written book, but the crux of the book was how you sort of literally saw the cracks of the road, when you cycled to the seaside, and how you saw that you need to really be connected with Mother Earth and nature, and how you kind of moved to Sharanagati village. And there you kind of make the point about how we should really live a simple life, and particularly being content with what we have. So how do we balance this, achieve this finite balance where you have aspirations and you have ambitions, but also equally be content with what we have?
Yeah, well, Krishna describes in the Gita that one of the austerities of the mind is satisfaction. So every devotee is supposed to strive to be satisfied where we are, personally satisfied. But for Krishna, we can be very ambitious and have very extensive horizons that we want to strive for. And again, we can look to Prabhupada for that. When he was in the Bowery by himself, he would be there translating his books, chanting his japa, inviting people Monday, Wednesday, Friday for discourses. And then when that no longer became tenable, living there because of his roommate, then with great help and endeavor, he moved to 26 Second Avenue. And again, just being satisfied personally where he was, what he was doing. But he had huge aspirations for the Krishna consciousness movement, for spreading Lord Chaitanya's message. So both things are there. There's personal sense of contentment and satisfaction. Not that we're striving for ourselves and we feel very restless and dissatisfied and in anxiety, but for the Lord, for his mission, for our spiritual master, then we can have so many things we have in mind to do, so many goals to try to achieve. So both things can be there, the personal side and then the missionary side, and they're quite different. But it's important for the missionary side to be successful that we find that inner satisfaction, that inner contentment. Otherwise, it's hard to be peaceful and pursue that mission as it's meant to be pursued.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think that was a very insightful question on something that I often reflect upon. And I really liked how you explained how, as individuals, we need to learn to be content and have the sense of inner satisfaction, I think, through our relationship with Krishna. But for the spiritual master, we can have great ambitions. And I have a question about that, though. I think that if we still do have desires to, say, for instance, do something big, even maybe we have a desire to be known, I'm wondering if we then engage that, or dovetail it in the service for the spiritual master, will we then become purified? Because sometimes I have to confess that in some spheres of my life I can be content, but in other spheres of my life I have this experience that I feel my desires are so strong that if I don't in some way fulfill them in this lifetime, I'll have to take birth again, just to have those desires fulfilled. So then I think, oh no, rather maybe I should find a way to dovetail them.
Yeah, certainly. Krishna says, if you're full of desires, if you have no desires, if you desire liberation, whatever it is, if you do that in the service of Krishna, then certainly you'll become purified and come closer to Krishna. So that's definitely there. But I think also that whatever it is you do, if you do it steadily and with heart, then Prabhupada, by his mercy, he will fulfill your desires. Krishna, by his mercy, will fulfill them. Just take the example of Jananivas Prabhu. He's a pujari, and he's been steadily there as a pujari in Mayapur for so long, and he's internationally famous for being a pujari in Mayapur. So that comes. I think our desires will come if we can simply have the determination just to go on with our service, with the idea of pleasing Krishna. That song that we sing every morning, the Guru Bandhanam, one of the lines is, by the spiritual master's mercy, all our desires will be fulfilled. By the mercy of the spiritual master, all our desires will be fulfilled. So we can have that faith that if we apply ourselves with some sincerity, we may have so many material desires, and we're in this material world. It's not unusual to have material desires. But if we, as you say, dovetail them, they'll be purified, but also they'll be fulfilled in some way. Perhaps we don't know what way they'll be fulfilled, but they will be fulfilled.
Because I think we can trust that Krishna will work in mysterious ways. And I really liked, what you shared now, how if we have that purity of desire, Krishna will arrange a way. And I think it also connects with something that you shared earlier when we discussed how Prabhupada often had a husband and wife team basically manage temples. And one of our viewers, Surabi, also commented on this, that we really have a need to cooperate, because we want to be clear. It's not that we want to somehow exclude men from leadership, or that we're saying that women should replace men in leadership, but rather we think that in order to serve Srila Prabhupada's mission and to serve this conquest, it would be wonderful if we can learn how to cooperate better. And I think that's also another type of dovetailing, is even if, there are certain ladies who have, managerial skills or have the desire to play a leading role in the community, I think instead of thinking that they should necessarily replace the men or do what the men do, they can actually complement the men in leadership if they are, if they're willing to see it, that how we are all, contributing specific and unique things. So I think if there is, because I know some ladies who definitely have that propensity, I think it's nice to have that mood. How can I dovetail? How can I connect? How can I add? I don't have to replace. I don't have to compete. but I can bring something unique as a woman, to leadership. So I think it's dovetailing our desires to Krishna, dovetailing like men and women, but also dovetailing like your desire for maybe management, but also then your feminine nature.
I think off the back of that one, I picked up somebody in the audience asked a question that I wanted to ask you, Prabhu. That how would you describe your leadership style? Obviously you head up the community at the Manor, which is a very sort of epicenter of the devotee community in the UK. So you are a prominent leader in the movement. So how would you describe your leadership style? Is this what this person in the audience wanted to know? And also any specific challenges that you have come across, and how you've gone on about kind of dealing with those challenges.
Yeah, I don't really have a word for my management style because I'm so new at management, but I do try to take each and every devotee seriously. And if there's any way that I can serve the devotee, I take that seriously. I write it down and make a note of it and try to extend myself to help the devotee in whatever way they may need help. And in these management meetings that we go to, there are quite a few management meetings. Generally, I try to listen carefully to what people are saying and understand the challenge from different points of view, different angles of vision. I noticed that in England, we're celebrating the 70th year of the Queen's reign in England. It's a big time right now. It was just yesterday, it was 70 years since she became queen. And I noticed that she never expresses her opinion about things that everybody in England expresses her opinions about, at least not publicly, maybe to her family, but no one knows what she thinks about Brexit. No one knows what she thinks about Boris Johnson. We can guess, but she doesn't express it. So that's very educational. We tend to have opinion about everything, but here we have this queen who is more popular than any politician in Great Britain, very popular, and she doesn't come out and express her opinion. She does express her trust in God, her devotion to God. She has served the country, put the country before personal considerations for all this time. And she's been the face of England for longer than most people in England can remember. And she's exceptionally, people are exceptionally affectionate towards her and respectful towards her. So there's a lesson in that, I think, that perhaps we don't have to have an opinion about everything, but we have to act in an honorable way and be responsive to the people that we're responsible for, or trying to be responsible for, and ourselves try to really apply ourselves to the process that we've devoted our lives to.
That's very wonderful. Thank you. Because, we all, like you mentioned, in England particularly, everybody wants to give your what we call two pence worth, and just express their opinions. Because, I manage people, I manage a team of work, and, in these meetings, you see, even amongst leaders, everybody wants to, get their voice heard. And often it's just, even Shakespeare said, give every man thy ear, but few thy voice, So it's just, listening, God's given us 2 ears, but one mouth. But I think it's a very difficult thing sometimes. There's this also, I've seen personally, some women in leadership, often if you're surrounded by a lot of men and you feel a bit, I don't know, intimidated, sometimes people think, talking or expressing your opinion often could be the way to do it. But I think you put it very eloquently. You almost do the other way around. You kind of listen to what people have to say, and that could often be much more effective than trying to speak lots and to be seen. And the Queen is an example of doing exactly that, what you just said.
I'd also like to add, Visakha Prabhu, I have to confess, I've always been a very big fan of the Queen. And I think she definitely deserves the adoration that she has. And something I think I've observed of her over the years is, as you mentioned, she actually brings in harmony, and she actually brings unity. And you see that in the UK, she's a very strong unifying force. Even people that are not fond of the monarchy are still fond of the Queen. And I think maybe it's because she's, as you said, she's taken on this role where she's not. I think she's not so concerned about her own opinion, but she's more concerned about the well-being of the nation in general. And I think as women, that's actually a big contribution we could make if we are in leadership, is to meditate upon how we can bring harmony, how we can bring unity, how, as you mentioned, do what you did, take time to listen, rather than to speak, rather than to instruct, see what we can learn. And in that way, I think we end up being able to serve others to a much greater extent.
Yes, so I got another question. Sorry for the echo. I do apologize. It's just tricky catching. What's the word? Mimics. It's like running. Hide and seek almost. Trying to find who's on mute, who's not on mute. So I do apologize for the technical difficulties. But a point related to that is, we talk about women being in leadership roles and all that. However, there's also these tendency, because I read recently there was a study done by the Forbes, for instance, where there's a point about the biggest barrier that women face as leaders is not actually from men or the society, but actually from having less support from other women. Women almost having to convince other women to support them. So how can we as Vaishnavis support and empower each other and strengthen our relationships, even if we have different opinions between us?
That if someone has a propensity to do something, that other Vaishnavas encourage that person, regardless of the body, that we should try to understand that actual daiva Varnasrama, it's not based on birth, which includes gender, but it's based on activities and propensities. So regardless of the body, if a person has the propensity for leadership, for management, for organization, for speaking, whatever it may be, if we see that, it's a little spark we want to fan, because that person will flourish in that, given that opportunity to serve. And we will all benefit, as I mentioned before. We all benefit from that. So that's, not to pull somebody down or restrict or oppress someone based on the body, including gender differences or race differences or age differences, that we try to train ourselves to see past these things, to see the urge of the soul to serve the Lord in some particular way, and just give that person the facility that he or she needs to do that service, and the encouragement. If you give the facility and the encouragement, and very often the time as well, then amazing things can happen. And again, we saw that with Prabhupada, that he would see somebody's propensity, for instance, in leadership, and give them some training, and then send them to a place, give them sometimes a country, sometimes a continent, and say, do what you can here to make devotees, to make centers, to distribute books, to have Harinam. So in this way, people felt such a source of strength from Srila Prabhupada that would drive them on and on to do extraordinary things. Otherwise, how did our movement spread the way it did between 1966 and 1977? Simply Prabhupada seeing the spark and fanning that spark until so expertly that it became something very bright and potent, that they could ignite other sparks.
Thank you so much, Visakha Prabhu. Always when I listen to Prabhupada memories, that really strikes me. Sorry, that really strikes me how Prabhupada would, see any little bit of enthusiasm or skill in someone and how he would always encourage them. Now, a question that I have is that often, we see in the Vaishnava community that we have a group of devotees that feel that Varn Ashram Dharma is very important. And they feel that, those who support the idea that women can be in leadership, whether that's, in the field of management, whether that's in the field of spiritual leadership, they feel that that is inherently against Varn Ashram Dharma because they tend to emphasize the women's role, what they call, the Stri Dharma, just the Dharma of women. But I found it interesting now you were saying that, if we actually encourage Daivi Varnashram, then we should just look at the person's propensities. We should not, even primarily necessarily consider the gender, but we should look what is that person's propensities. So how do we then balance that? Like on the one hand, there's if we want to have Varnashram Dharma, there's this focus on, you've got to fulfill the duties of a woman, but then how do you also at the same time fulfill the duties of what probably is your Varna, especially if you have, I would say, like either a more of a Kshatriya nature or a Brahmana's nature, because both those natures, I think, are going to kind of naturally push you towards some form of leadership.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say, that in Daivi Varnashram, that Krishna describes in the Gita, it's according to one's activities and qualities, right? Guna and karma. Krishna is very clear about that. He doesn't say it's by birth. So to be a man or a woman, that's by birth. But the guna and karma, the qualities and the activities, that's according to the individual's propensities. So that we have to look at. That is actually, the Daivi Varnashram system is actually what Krishna and Srila Prabhupada want to establish in society. And that means that there's no sexism, there's no racism. How can sexism or racism be part of Krishna's plan, right? So by Krishna's own description, very clearly, it's not a matter of birth. It's not janma. It's guna and karma. That's that's right in Bhagavad Gita, and it's repeated in Srimad Bhagavatam. So certainly, according to the woman's propensity, she wants to have the child. Generally, there are exceptions, and that's glorious. That's a glorious service. But as we were saying earlier, after the formative years, the child starts to go to school and has more time with their friends, and they're more engaged according to their own propensities. And then the mother has more time to also develop her propensities. There's no reason that she should be frustrated. Krishna would not create a system whereby half the population was frustrated, that they couldn't fulfill their own personal vision of what they wanted to do in his service. That wouldn't be sensible for the Supreme Lord to create such a system. Perhaps we have to more fully understand this Varnashram system and not have a rigid view of it based on our culture, perhaps, or based on some preconception, or based on the male propensity to feel superior to women. But look at it as a system where everyone can be satisfied and feel fully engaged according to their desires.
Thank you so much. I think the way that you've now described Varnashram is actually, it's a system that empowers people and enables people and supports, them to develop their full capacities in service of Krishna. It's not supposed to be a system that is, I think, rigid or oppressive or in any way kind of constraining people. I mean, there's healthy limitations, but I think that's very different from what is sometimes perceived, or even I think community as more as a system of not only limitations, but I would say very specific kind of demands that we are placing on individuals based on their birth and not based on their characteristics.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
think
that was a very good point you made in terms of particularly that point about, it's not according to your body, because we always talk about we're not the body, we're the soul, but equally when it comes to these things, it's just always, we all get very carried away by our material body. So I think the point about guna and karma, how, that's what defines what role you take on, and that's what should define what role you take on in society, is something that really resonated with you. I honestly wish, Prabhu, we could, get it on a big poster and banner and, post it, plaster it everywhere, so Vaishnavis all over can truly see that and hear that, coming from you as well. I'm sure somebody that most people look up to, from Prabhupada disciple themselves coming, that coming from them, I think could be really, really inspiring. So if I had it my way, I would put it on a poster and plaster it everywhere, frankly. But thank you. That was really lovely.
So another thought which I had, Vishakha Prabhu, is I once met a Vaishnavi. At the point when I met her, she was a more senior Vaishnavi, but when she came to the movement, she was quite a young lady. But at that point in time, she had really made a lot of progress in her professional development, and she was actually the director of an airline. So she was in a very high managerial position. But then when she came to ISKCON, because she was a lady and she was still fairly young, she explained to the devotees what her skills were and what her experience were, what her qualifications were, but they insisted that she just makes garlands because they kind of concluded, well, you're a woman, so you're most suited, to making garlands. So we find that often, especially with single women, that is kind of a barrier that they have, like the moment, and we think being a woman already often in certain places in ISKCON, it's going to create limitations and barriers for you to do certain services. But if you're a single woman, we see that often even more limitations, are placed on you. Maybe not in official policy, but we see that in the practical realm that often happens. I, for instance, know I've got some friends who are, very devout devotees. They're very eloquent speakers. I think they're very qualified to speak, but because they're single ladies, they never asked to give class, especially, a class when there is a greater chance that there will be a greater audience. Maybe they'll give in a class like midday at the temple in the middle of the week, when there's very few attendees, but they will never be asked to give the Sunday feast lecture, for instance. So how do we address this issue that we have, where we often see single women, I think, are kind of even ostracized sometimes, and other times definitely discriminated against when it comes to service opportunities?
Yeah, that is a very common problem that you described, no doubt. And certainly part of it could be cultural, that especially in India, women are not usually seen, especially in the temples, to be speaking, to be out in the front. So that's there. And also, as I say, sometimes the men growing up in ISKCON, they're not used to women taking a prominent role or speaking in the temple for major classes. So it's kind of a rut, perhaps, that's developed in some places. And also there's the idea that you have the celibate men, the brahmacharis, who are, in this day and age, it's a very difficult and heroic feat to try to be celibate when there's so much pressure all around us to be the opposite. So I think we need to honor that and understand that perhaps that is difficult for the young men who are attempting that. So to have a young, unmarried, sometimes very attractive woman speaking for 45 minutes, that could be a challenge for these young men. no doubt. And at the same time, as you say, we want to give full facility to the women that come with this sincere propensity and ability to serve in this way. So we really have to sit down and churn this so that both can be satisfied, and neither the men feel that their struggle to be celibate is being threatened or being overlooked or underrated. It should be valued and protected. And at the same time, these women who come with these abilities, they're intelligent and they want to serve. We have to give them full facility. We don't want them to be frustrated in any way or to feel that they're second class in any way. So we really have to sit down and churn this. How do we satisfy both without in any way undermining Prabhupada's desire? He wants the celibate brahmacharis. He wants the women to do everything they can do. And so we have to use our intelligence to figure out how to do this. And I'm sure it is possible, but first the desire has to be there. Once the desire is in place, then the way to do it will become clear.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. What I really appreciated about your answer was that you emphasized that we need to acknowledge both sides. On the one hand, we do need to acknowledge, it is a struggle to be a monk. I've often told my friends that I could never make it as a monk, like living in the 21st century, like say mid-London. I don't know, how those devotees do it. I wouldn't be able to do it, like honestly, because I feel like, there's just so much distraction. So I can definitely I can definitely like feel their struggle. They need to be protected and they definitely don't need extra alluring. So on the one side, we definitely need to think about ways how we can protect them. And also, I think even the other, men in our society, even if they're not brahmacharis, they do want to be celibate. They do want to be faithful, to their wives. I think we definitely need to respect that. But at the same time, as you emphasized, we can't do that at the cost of then just not giving, young women any opportunities just because they're young women. Because some women, might stay beautiful and attractive right until their late 40s. So it would be such a loss, just because someone happens to be an attractive lady that she cannot speak, she cannot lead, she cannot, do kirtan just because she's attractive. So I do think you're right. We need to maybe discuss this more openly and find, practical and workable solutions for everyone.
Very well put. Thank you. You expressed that beautifully.
Just this time and again, I'm very new to the movement, not very versed, or don't know huge amounts of devotees, but in my little time, just over 2 years in the movement, I've witnessed this personally, the point you mentioned about the culture. So there's this element where women feel, even though they feel qualified and that they can contribute, they feel for some weird reason they should always be at the back of the temple. You see at the morning morning arti, Mataji is squashed into a little, back row, and people just a bit reluctant, ladies themselves, a bit reluctant to put themselves through, forward. So what advice do you have to those who have a burning desire but probably see that as, oh, I'm an unmarried young woman, but I just don't feel confident or capable almost to kind of put myself out there? What advice do you have for those sort of women that feel that they can't, put themselves forward really?
To manner, we have one devotee who's assigned to ask devotees to give class each morning, either Srimad Bhagavatam during the week or Chaitanya Charitamrita on the weekends. And she makes sure that as much as possible, at least once a week, a woman gives class, minimum once a week. And I think when the women see other women giving class, they feel inspired. Well, if she's giving class, why can't I give class? Just this morning we had a beautiful class by Guru Srila Devi Dasi on Advaita Charya. And afterwards she was saying to other women that you should also give class, women that haven't yet stepped forward. So I think that's very encouraging to see women doing these things And then those women encourage others. Yes, you can do it. You have been reading Prabhupada's books, you have been hearing his lectures, you have so many insights. So just instilling that thought within the woman, and then perhaps that grows if we can water that and give it some rich soil to grow in. And then more and more women taking that example will also step forward and do that service. So the example is very important. And as far as standing in the back, the GBC did decide that the temple room should be split down the middle. So on one side are the men and the other side are the women. So the women, at least according to the GBC decision that I heard, the women should have full access to the altar so they can go all the way to the front. Now, if they choose not to do that, again, we need examples of women that do go up and get a clear, full view of the altar. And then others also can follow those good examples.
Thank you. That was a very good answer. And I think, the best way we can lead is by example, isn't it? So if we need to set examples, like you mentioned in the class this morning, if we get more willing women, I suppose, to give class, to put themselves forward, and which is exactly why we started this podcast, because, we've had the pleasure of doing outreach last year throughout the pandemic with Soho Street, and I've met so many wonderful devotees, female devotees, and we just genuinely wanted to create this community almost to bring everybody together to discuss these topics, which we normally don't really hear, on a Sunday lecture, these kind of topics that are very prevalent and important to ladies, isn't being discussed. And that was literally the sole purpose of this thing. So thank you. We're very grateful to have you, Prabhu. And Shraddha, I think you now have a comment on that.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I'm conscious of time. I'd like to speak to Visakha Prabhu for very long, but I know she's got many other important services to attend to. So I think we'll have to end with one last question. But yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that I did spend some time at Bhaktivedanta Mana, and of all the places I've been, and I've visited temples in many different countries. I mean, I've been in India, South Africa, been in Germany, France, also in Switzerland, Thailand. And I found that at the manor, there was definitely, I would say, the most support for ladies. I thought it was a very, almost like an encouraging environment. But at the same time, I still saw that there was a lot of ladies still felt very reserved in coming forward and speaking. So I do think we have a long way to go. And I think as you emphasize, the best way to do that is to do that ourselves, is to even or create spaces in where ladies feel safe and confident to speak and to share. Now, our last question, which is related to this topic, is that we often hear as an argument against why women should be in leadership, or why women should even give class, or why women should be in management. We often hear just a very simple argument against it, and it is that women should be protected. So the argument goes, because women should be protected, they should not be in management, be leaders, or give class. However, in your article which you wrote, which I find is a fascinating article for our viewers, I did put it in the live chat. It is an article Visakha Prabhu wrote a while ago, and I think she really took a lot of time to compile it. And the article is called "What is a Woman to Do?" There's two parts to it, and I really recommend that, whether you're a Vaishnava or Vaishnavi, I recommend that you should read this. Also, what I appreciate, I just want to say that briefly about this article, it's not as if Visakha Prabhu is just giving her own opinions. She's literally just giving statements from Srila Prabhupada, quotes from Srila Prabhupada, and maybe she explains it, or maybe she reflects upon it, but it's straight from Srila Prabhupada, what she's sharing. And one point which you make in that article is that the fact that women need to be protected doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot be in leadership. So can you maybe explain how you came to that conclusion? So a woman could be protected and still be in leadership. So how would that dynamic work?
Yeah, I think that perhaps there's a misunderstanding or a misconception about protection. And it's very intriguing that if we look at the etymology of the word itself, it gives us a hint into what protection is, in my understanding, in that the word itself means to shield from exposure or injury or damage or destruction. But the pro in the word means in front of, right? And the last part of it means to cover or to shelter. That's one understanding. So you come in front of something to shelter it, to protect it from damage. But there's another way you can look at this prefix, pro. Just like you have the phrase pro-American, that means a champion of America. A support, you're supporting America. So in this way, you're giving shelter to a person that you champion. You champion the person, therefore you give that person shelter. And Prabhupada sometimes described protection as facilitation, giving facility. So in that sense, we could say that protection for a woman does not mean depriving her of service, but rather giving her the facility, the space, the shelter, whereby she can do the service that she desires. That's protection. Rather than controlling her in such a way that she's unable to do the service that she desires, in which case she feels frustrated. She feels oppressed or repressed. So in that way, the actual protection is just like if you have a valuable plant, we can say the Bhakti Lata Bij. If something's very valuable, you want to protect it. If you have a plant, you want to protect it from damage, from animals or what have you coming to it and hurting it in some way. So similarly, a devotee is so valuable, a Vaishnavi, so you want to give her shelter so that she can flourish. So that is protection. Not to take something away, but rather to facilitate.
Thank you so much, Ru. I think that was a beautiful description of what it means to give protection. And I think we can meditate upon how in Vedic culture, Vaishnava culture, it's not only the women that need protection, but actually several members of society. We know the brahmanas need protection, the children need protection, the cows need protection. And with that understanding that it's because you value something, you want to look after and facilitate it, I think that completely changes the way we will approach those who need protection. I think we had a beautiful comment from one of our viewers, Hari Kirtan. He said, women in leadership positions should be protected the same way as Bhishma Dev, I think he meant would have been supported by the phalanxes of the army. So we know on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, although we had this very great warrior, Bhishma Dev, he still needed protection, from other people in the army. So I find that's a fascinating image that Hari Kirtan gave us, and I think it's a beautiful way we can maybe conclude this podcast, as we can meditate upon, even if we have ladies in leadership like we have Visakha Prabhu now taking on, which is a very serious service, being temple president of Bhaktivedanta Manor, one of our very prominent centers in ISKCON. We can meditate upon how we can all in some way protect her in her leadership role, how we can support her, and how we can really be there for her so she can optimally then serve the Vaishnava community. So thank you very much for everyone that tuned in and watched our first Many Moons podcast. We really appreciate your support. We have seen many encouraging comments. We do acknowledge that there were several questions that came up in the live chat, which we could not necessarily all share with Visakha Prabhu, but we do acknowledge those questions, and we will look at those questions and see if we can maybe have them answered by guests in our upcoming podcast. So please do forgive us if you felt we didn't give full attention to your comments, but we did see them, and we are very much looking forward to being back with you here with our Many Moons podcast in 2 weeks' time. Visakha Prabhu, is there any closing words you have that you want to share before we end?
I really appreciate both of you for doing this service. I think it's very important and it's been missing. So you're definitely filling a need. And I'm very grateful to you for doing that, for taking the initiative to create this podcast. And I hope that you have many viewers in the future and you make a significant change for the better in our society. Thank you.
Thank blessings and your comment, and we are hugely honored and grateful for you for giving your time to us for this podcast. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we do apologize for any glitches in terms of technical issues, any echoes you may have found, and if you felt we were stopping starting, so the conversations probably would have flowed better if we didn't have these issues. But please do forgive us for all our misgivings, and hope you found this session useful, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Sharadia, do you have any final remarks you wanted to make?
I would just like to remark that I think Visakha Prabhu, you can't see the comments that's coming in from the live, but we're getting a lot of appreciation for all the insights that you shared. And I know that you're a very busy person, but at the same time, I do hope that you will make time to come and be a guest for us again, hopefully in the near future.
Thank you. I would be honored to. So nice to have your company.
Dear devotees, we will end our first episode of Many Moons here. Please do stay in touch with us. You're welcome to either leave comments for us here on the Bodhika Facebook page, either on the Sattvi Sangha YouTube page. If you leave comments or leave us questions, we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. And you're also welcome to leave suggestions for further guest speakers and also for topics. We already have people invited up until I think March or April. But of course, we are very open to your suggestions. So with that, we will greet you, and we're wishing everyone an auspicious appearance day of Advaita Acharya, and we're looking forward to seeing you again soon. Hare Krishna.